3 days after that horrific mass shooting, U.S. President Joe Biden and his wife were in Buffalo today, visiting with victims' families. The Buffalo, New York community is just across the U.S. border, 2 hours from Toronto. And as we learn more about the suspect and the hateful motive behind this attack, the tragedy is no doubt impacting GTA communities like ours as well. For more on this, we welcome to CP24 tonight Tanya Sharp, founder and director of The Crib, Mitzi Hunter, Liberal candidate in Scarborough-Guildwood, and Curie Daniel, equity leader with Parents of Black Children. Thanks to all of you. I want to start with the motive behind this tragedy, something called replacement theory. You know, we've seen this before. It's a theme in a number of mass shootings targeting people of color. Tanya, explain to us what this is and where this rhetoric really comes from.
I mean, the rhetoric really comes from the kitchen table, the hate speech that is allowed to happen from childhood. Also, the ease at which the perpetrator was able to engage in conversation. And so when we have comments like this was a lone wolf that committed this terrorist act, this hateful act, that is a false narrative. That this perpetrator was held in spaces and places where white supremacy and hate speech exist. And so I think we really need to understand the magnitude of that, and now we're seeing that impact.
Okay, so to this point about lone wolf, that narrative that we often hear, Mitzi, when something awful happens like this in the U.S. or around the world, we often see this Canadian exceptionalism attitude or narrative play out. So let me ask you, is it safer to be Black in Canada?
Chanel, I just want to say how deeply sorry I am to all of the victims' families and friends and coworkers, and to the entire Buffalo community. We here in Toronto, Ontario, we feel it. And when something like this happens, where someone is, or people are targeted simply for the color of their skin and their race, it affects all of us. And that trauma reverberates across the community. And, you know, it is deeply held beliefs. And I completely agree with Tanya that, this person learned this from somewhere. You don't, get to be 18 years old and commit such a heinous act without having been fed this diet from somewhere. And, as a community, including here in Canada and in Ontario, we have to confront anti-Black racism. We have to recognize that the roots of colonialism, the roots of anti-Black racism is very much a reality for us here in Ontario as it is playing out itself in the United States. And there is no exception to that. Dr. Martin Luther King says, an injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. And so we feel it too.
But Tanya, where are people learning about this? I mean, can you talk about the transition, the radicalization? How do we get from the rhetoric that we see, in far-right conservative media to someone going and shooting 10 Black people at a supermarket? How do we get there?
They're engaging in platforms and engaging with individuals who are encouraging the violence. It's very, very clear in the manifesto that the perpetrator was operating from. And I also want to dispel this narrative that there's a mental health issue. People that are mentally ill are far more likely to be on the receiving end of hate and violence rather than be perpetrating violence. And while the perpetrator may be mentally ill, he is also a racist. So hate is not a mental illness. And so, we have to really begin to understand the proper language to use, but also what allowed for this to amplify to this level. And so it's really, he was allowed to go on different platforms and find out what gun to buy, what safety gear to protect him. So we've got to think about how are we going to engage in platforms, but also we are going to be significantly remiss if we think that incidents like these are just the only incidents of white supremacy. White supremacy happens when we have micro, dare I say, macroaggressions occurring in the classroom, in the boardroom, and at the kitchen table. So we all have a responsibility to intervene, as my colleague just said.
Okay, so I want to bring Kiri in on this part of the conversation and talk about the impact of all of this here at home, because this is obviously traumatic for the Buffalo community, but also for anyone who can see themselves in this situation. Let's listen first to a mother in Buffalo who spoke to us about how she's experiencing this moment.
I didn't ask to be a part of the history books, like not in this fashion. This is a lot. I've got black children I'm raising into a world, and I have to help them make sense of this without creating hate in their heart for people who do stuff like this. And I don't know how to differentiate the good ones and the bad ones, and it's very hard and very tough to teach that to my children.
I have to tell you, every time I heard that clip yesterday, I just felt so emotional. I mean, Kiri, can you talk about the ripple effect here, the impact of this on people here in our community?
Absolutely. Tanya is 100% right when she talks about the classroom as being one of the roots of white supremacy. And we need school boards, we need class teachers, administration, school board leaders to really pay attention what is happening in their classroom. Racism, racist acts, racist bullying within our schools are often not taken seriously and not handled with the seriousness that and the attention that needs to take place. And it allows white supremacy to manifest itself and to root itself within our schools. We have kids on all sorts of online platforms as early as 8 years old, even younger, where they are not being supervised. They're sharing memes. They're sharing things that parents might think is innocent, but those are the roots. That's where it starts. When you talk about radicalization, that's where it starts. And we need to be having conversations. We need to be monitoring our students and our children and the platforms that they are using and the information that they are sharing with each other, across these platforms. That really is the key. And when we see racist acts, when parents are going to schools, when parents are contacting organizations like Parents of Black Children, and we're going in to advocate and talking about and raising the alarm around these racist acts, they have to be taken seriously. I can't tell you the number of times we hear, they didn't mean it, or they're just children. This is where it starts. We have to take it seriously.
Kiri, I'm sorry, we're running out of time, but I want to ask you this really important question about how parents should address racism or hate with their children. How do you explain this? How do you give them advice without inciting fear?
It's never too early to talk about racism. It's never too early to talk about race. It's a fact of life. As early as the primary ages, we're talking to kids about celebrating our differences. When they get to those intermediate grades, when they're getting into high school, we need to be having open conversations about what it means to be radicalized. What does it mean to share a meme with racist undertones? What does that mean? And how does that escalate into something more serious? The same way we educate our children about sexual predators online, we need to be educating them about white supremacists and racist predators online, because they are ripe for the picking. They are open, they are available, they are online on their own, and they are ripe for the picking. So parents need to have these transparent conversations the same way you would around sexual predators.
I'm so sorry we have to leave the conversation there for now, but this is such an important topic, and I'm sure we'll pick this up again soon. Mitzi Hunter, Tanya Sharp, and Kiri Daniel, thanks so much for your time and your perspective on this tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.